Next, I am pleased to welcome Nicholas Guerin, a promising law student here at the Law Center and a contributing writer at Policy Reform Now. Specializing in comparative visa law, Mr. Guerin's insights into immigration policy and its impacts on fairness and legal protection offer a fresh perspective on contemporary legal challenges. Today, he presents on the potential transformative impact of Britain's HBI visa on American graduates. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Guerin.
Thank you all. Thank you all. You on? Working? Can y'all hear me good? Okay. Well, thank you all for having me today. I'm going to be talking about an interesting discovery that I saw when doing some of my research, which is that the United Kingdom is offering a sort of a revolutionary new visa type based solely on academic accomplishment alone. So the UK introduced a visa where the qualifications for obtaining that visa, which would give the bearer a several-year residence permit per se in the UK, would be where they went to school. So the government of the UK decided that it would be a good idea in order to draw foreign talent into the country to introduce a visa that gives really streamlined entry into the UK if you attended a top global, not just US, but a global university, Yale, Harvard, Cambridge, Oxford, etc. So I was very excited to hear about this. I spoke about this same topic at my alma mater at LSU Law Center in their education symposium. I received a publication offer for this piece, and as I was working on it recently, I got word that apparently the visa program had been killed. So that was bad news. I checked today, and the website was reopened again. So I'm trying to actually figure out if the program has indeed been furloughed or not. Nevertheless, I think it sheds some light into what shaping immigration policy in the right direction looks like and how we can reflect it in the US visa regime. So I'm first of all going to talk about how this kind of plays into recent affirmative action decisions by the Supreme Court in college admissions. So as you are all aware, recently in the Harvard case, the Supreme Court has basically quashed race-based consideration and applications for colleges in the US. So I went ahead and quoted a New York Times headline, which said, "The ruling will shift the makeup of many of America's top universities, as well as the prospects of students who want to attend them." So it's important when we're talking about affirmative action reactions by the courts in the US, look at a timeline. So originally in college admissions, it was normally a very sterile process in how admissions committees would evaluate a potential student, an applicant. It would basically be a minimum GPA and standardized test score, SAT, ACT, etc. What history showed was when this was the case, the student bodies ended up being very racially non-diverse. So in 1965, President Johnson, through an executive order, or should I say a series of executive orders, allowed for race-based admissions as a consideration factor. 1974, Supreme Court refuses to decide whether that was constitutional. So after this time period, certain universities started kind of trying out what they felt would be the best method to create diversity in their student body. So some, a lot of these examples are in California, but some decided they would make quotas based on race. That was struck down by the Supreme Court in 1978. Some, like UC Berkeley, kind of created a very interesting diversity index. So they considered a lot of factors, including race, but also economic background, because economic impact, people that were economically disadvantaged was also harming their chances of getting into these universities. So in 2003, the Supreme Court allowed basically what we've all recently been familiar with, if you've attended a university, worked at a university in the last 20 years, which is kind of the holistic review. So they're looking at a large quantity of things, including race, but also, I mean, personal essays, scores, your history, your employment, things like that. In 2023, that is now the race section of that holistic review has now been eliminated, as you guys all remember, in the Harvard case. But this isn't new exactly in the United States, maybe at the federal level, but in California, in the 90s, they decided to wipe out affirmative action. Well, California voters did. First, in 1995, I have found a LA Times article from 1995 where UC wiped out, as quoted, affirmative action. And then in 1966, famously, California voters decided to basically outlaw affirmative action in college admissions considerations. So in that basically 20, 25-year time span since that happened, Zach Bleemer, who's an econ professor at Princeton, did a large study about what happened to the people that were directly affected when that 1996 bill became a law. So basically, they found a lot of negative things happen. So Black and Hispanic enrollment in selective schools decreased largely, while it increased in less selective institutions. So the argument was, or the comment by Zach was, folks of all races still went into university level or above, but we saw a hindrance in selective school enrollment, graduate school opportunities and enrollment went down from people affected by the 1996 California law. So we can kind of, foreshadow that there's likely no good outcome of this, decision either in the future from here on out. So it kind of illustrates the whole premise that the drive of young Americans to go to college to better themselves are there, but there may be these extenuating circumstances that sort of hinder them that they can't really control, kind of, harming their futures, but really being out of their hands. So I decided, so right around the same time that the Supreme Court was hearing oral arguments and so on and so forth with the Harvard case in holistic reviews, the UK, the Prime Minister of the UK, Rishi Sunak, basically spoke on a famous YouTube podcast about how he said he created this visa, although it actually was in effect before he mentioned this, but he said that he created. So I'm going to read what he said. The Prime Minister of the UK said about this new academic visa. So he said, "I created something that I'm particularly proud of, called the High Potential Person Visa. That basically says if you graduate from a global top 50 university, 1, you can speak English, 2, you've got an amount to support yourself, 3, just come to the UK. You don't need to have a job. You can come here for a couple of years, figure out what you want to do. We'll put you on a proper visa then, but we think you're talented." So really sort of almost begging for these alumni from these selective universities to come to the UK, which is very remarkable. I mean, immigration policies country by country are often the same, and it's really you have to have strong and convincing ties that you're a self-sufficient person to get such a visa. And for a country such as the UK, a highly developed country with established tourism, to be kind of begging for applicants is very abnormal. So they're really kind of curtailing traditional strictness in visa policy in order to attract and allure these these highly skilled graduates to come to the UK. The problem is when you look at when you look at the top 50 global universities, safe to say that not many people go to those, and they're kind of hard to get into. I took from the 50 universities, all the ones that were in the United States, and you can kind of look at the enrollment numbers and the acceptance rates. I mean, you've got some schools that are accepting, 3% of applicants, 7% of applicants, 6% of applicants. So the people that would be eligible for this visa are something like 3.5% of the country. And another thing to note too is of the top 50 global universities, none of them are in any developing country. Whereas there are high quality universities in places like India, South Africa that do not appear on the list. If they expanded it outward to, let's say, a top 150 global universities, they would actually achieve having a university for students on each continent. That was a remedy I suggested. But the visa is great. I mean, no job is needed for these recent graduates. You can work when you get there. You can get a pathway to UK residence. The UK is a great place for people with professional degrees, meaning lawyers, doctors, dentists. The basically foreign equivalency transfer process in the UK is far easier for all of those professions than it is in the US. You can be self-employed with this visa. The amount of money that you need to have to your name to qualify is £1,270, which is very low considering that finances and a strong financial history is a big deal in immigration systems, including ours. I mean, in fact, you can be denied for a visa based on your financial solvency in the belief that you will come to the United States and then become a burden on the taxpayers if you run out of money. So this really works with the unstable, not wealthy, not grounded person, which is exactly what a recent graduate may be. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. So basically, this visa provides that your currency is your academic accomplishment. You went to this school, you get this possibility. They don't look at employment. Now that's, in the US immigration law, the INA says that you are presumed to be an immigrant if you're applying for a short-term visa, unless proven otherwise. So you have to prove, I do not intend to stay in the United States. I have a job, I have a property. You have to really overcome that assumption. Whereas here, they're okay with you lacking employment. They're okay with you lacking solvency, which ordinarily would be red flags in a visa adjudication process. But so it really does benefit those who want to brain drain, because one of the articles I was reading was talking about, people from places like India, Nigeria. These are folks in a country with, all these countries have large populations, highly educated. The young people take great stride in academic accomplishment. They're more so willing to immigrate than someone in perhaps the Western hemisphere, or at least the Western world, should I say. So it's very beneficial for those people to get onto this program, beneficial to the receiving economies. And these people, as I mentioned, are all often denied for such Western visas if they're from places that have, socioeconomic issues. If the country has high inflation, you're probably not going to, the amount sitting in your savings account, if your country is experiencing high inflation, is not going to go up. You're not going to make a lot in places where the minimum wage may be $100 a month. So it's hard to compete to get the visa for some tough places that adjudicate visas strictly, but this is a good visa. So The problem is that the the number of schools that are taken into account for this visa are very, very low. This is 50 in the whole world, the top 50 in the whole world, and that list changes every year. But as I mentioned, you've got entire continents, Africa, large portions of Asia with no eligible university on its soil. So you have a lot of people that are out of reach, really, to get into these universities that may still be extremely qualified and desirable people to have. Um, so, and this also affects, there are hundreds of thousands of students in the United States that are not on legal status. Um, More than that, there is something like 31% of students in the U.S. who are what they call immigrant origin students. So let's say you're a student who was on DACA, or let's say you are not on legal status, your visa expired. Um, these are serious problems. I mean, there has been speculation that, let's say you qualify, you're a lawful permanent resident, you qualify for the HPI visa, you leave the United States, you may lose your legal right to come back, or you may not have a legal right to come back at all. Although you've proven yourself academically in the eyes of immigration law, it's very sterile. It's not a good thing. It's also been reported that those on DACA who are given advanced parole, which is the way to travel for those on DACA, may face problems coming back to the United States. That's very risky for some Americans to do this jump across the pond for the HPI visa program. So I had a few remedies that I think would help make this HPI visa more inclusive. So first of all, obviously, I think we should expand the number of universities, or I think the United Kingdom should expand the number of universities that are on the list. And as I mentioned, if you just bumped it up to the top 150 universities in the world, which is still quite selective, you would accomplish the goal of having a university that is eligible for the program on each continent. And I think that would be very, very good. So my second remedy was I wanted to think, knowing the outcome of the California elimination of affirmative action in their study, how basically there were students who were equally as qualified to go to Ivy League schools that could not, due to very, very uncontrollable conditions. So I wanted to see how can this visa outreach itself to be accessible to people that are talented, but did not get the chance to go to a top 50 university. So I referenced the O visa, which is the United States' version of an extraordinary person visa. So a very famous soccer player, a very famous scholar that spoke at the United Nations. These are the type of people that can sort of be petitioned for to come to the United States on an O visa. So basically, someone submits a petition or an advisory opinion on why you're extraordinary, and that is reviewed by the USCIS. So I thought, well, why don't we go ahead and, instead of having a sterile, you had to have gone to this university, say, well, I didn't go to that university, but I'm extraordinary in these other ways. I've published many cited articles. I've spoken at many conferences. I've started an NGO. I own a business as a minority. These are things that I think would equally show a person's wherewithal and stride and accomplishment, rather than going off of the continuously noted notion of where you go to school is the majority of your background, when I don't think that it is at all. That's all I have.